Good WANA Live, the reading series of the Writers Association of Northern Appalachia. I'm your host, Damian Dressick, and this is your other host.
Christina Fasonic.
How are you tonight, Christina?
Just fine. How are you, Damien?
I'm fine, thank you. It looks very sunny where you are.
Yes, I'm on the back deck.
I see.
Yeah, so we have a new writer tonight. We first met Jerry, I think, in person when we were at Youngstown. And he's doing a lot of cool things. He's done cool stuff, and he's doing a lot of really cool things now. I'll tell everybody a little bit about him. Jerry Wemple is poet, nonfiction writer, and editor who writes frequently about the people and places of central Pennsylvania. He is the author of 3 poetry collections. His first was selected by Pulitzer Prize-winner Yusef Komunyakaa for the Naomi Long Madgett Poetry Award. His most recent, Artemis Ark, the Ridge and Valley poems, details the lives of 2 generations in a small town along the Susquehanna River. In addition, he has published 2 poetry chapbooks. He is co-editor, along with Marjorie Maddox, of the anthology Commonwealth, Contemporary Poets on Pennsylvania. Wemple is also editing an essay anthology focused on rural Pennsylvania, which I'm really excited to hear more about. Wemple is professor of English at Bloomsburg University of Pennsylvania and has won many, many awards. So let's bring him on.
Bring him on.
Hey, guys.
Good evening, Jerry.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's nice
Thanks
to see
for coming on.
Yeah.
So we mentioned a little bit there before your reading. I know you've got this new anthology that you're working on for rural Pennsylvania. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So this, the last couple of years, I've been thinking about Pennsylvania and Northern Appalachia, and so at the Northeast MLA conference this past spring in March that was down in Baltimore, I got a panel together where writers from various genres talked about that idea of Pennsylvania as Appalachia, because 52 of the 67 counties I think are officially termed Appalachia. So we were talking about that, and I was thinking about it more and more. And an editor from Bucknell University Press, the main editor, director of the press, contacted me, and we started talking a little bit and fleshed out this idea. So not necessarily restricted to the Appalachian counties, but just rural Pennsylvania, because I think Pennsylvania is interesting. At least in my generation, you could go 10 miles away and be in a completely different world, right? Yes. Different ethnic groups that settle there, different ways of talking, different ways of dress, just a whole different world. I think I grew up in Sunbury, which is at the confluence of the Susquehanna River, the north and the west branch. But if you went over the mountain to Shamokin, like 15 miles away, it was a totally different place. And because it was an anthracite town, it was a coal region town. But even across the river into Snyder County, much more rural, and the language and the way people talked was much more what people call Dutchy, much more German, Pennsylvania German language. So people might call a little rascal kid a Snickelfritz, right? And everybody knew what that meant.
Yeah. Well, I know that.
Before we go, what does that mean?
It just means like an energetic little, like a rascal, right?
Rascal.
Well, in other parts of Northern App, we might call that a towhead, a little blonde, flibberty gibbet or something like that. Yes.
But you would hear that in one town, but you wouldn't hear it at all in another town.
Sure.
And towns not that far away from each other. So I find it interesting about Pennsylvania, and so that's why I'm like, I want to hear all these voices, because we all identify as Pennsylvanians, but man, when you think about the difference between Erie and Wilkes-Barre and California and Philadelphia suburbs, just totally different places.
Oh, very much so, very much so. Yeah, growing up in the bituminous towns, and we had relatives that lived 20 miles away in Bedford, and it might have as well been North Carolina for the similarities on some level.
Yeah. I lived in Johnstown for 3 years. When I taught at UPJ for a while back in the mid to late 90s, and that was I think that was the first time that I had been in Pass State College in Pennsylvania, was when I was that job, because I had literally been around the world because I was in the Navy, but I'd never been to Western Pennsylvania because it was like the other side of the moon.
Right.
I think people really underestimate.
All right, so you're going to be reading some cool stuff for us tonight.
Yeah, hopefully. So.
Okay, are you ready?
Sure. I'm going to start off with one short poem from Artemis Ark, which was there it is, the most recent published work, and then I will read a couple of new poems. Artemis Ark is a series of narrative poems focused on a man and then a younger person who becomes a man. Like we watch him age, but at this point he's probably about 13 or 14. In this poem he's unnamed. Night falls suddenly when the sun declines behind these rolling hills. The boy sits on the riverside of the flood wall, his back to the town. He smokes a cigarette, counts the cars and tractor trucks on the state road across the water, wonders where they're bound. The boy would like a car, some way, any way, to leave the town, to drive past the farms until the hills grow and the woods thicken, and sit beside the tiny stream that is the start of this half-mile wide river. The boy rises, heads into town. He walks past the little park, a few blocks up Market, enters a tiny hot dog restaurant, nods to old Sam, who started the place after the war. Sam knows, fixes one with everything, uncaps a blue birch from the old dinged metal floor cooler, while the boy fingers the token in his pocket. Outside, the wind rises and shifts. So one of the things about Artemis Ark, every line in the collection is 10 syllables long. So it's not necessarily always iambic pentameter, but I got sick of counting syllables, so I did all prose poems in this new collection that I think I'm like 97% finished with. And this, I'll read you two poems and from this new collection, and it's the first and probably the last poem in the collection. Almost. You are 15 and riding a motorcycle on rain-wet county roads in the middle of Pennsylvania. It is the kind of activity that brings a state trooper to a mother's door while neighbors look on, wondering what's the matter. Your cousin, who you will soon learn is really your half-brother, is 14 and riding with you. He is on his stepfather's 305 Honda Scrambler with a purple metal flake tank and trim. You have the blue 250 Yamaha Enduro. Earlier, you and your cousin crossed a long and narrow bridge, did a half loop around the traffic circle, carefully dodging the tractor trailers, and headed up and over Blue Hill. At the bottom of the hill, just across the county line, lives a girl who has called your cousin on the telephone a few times. It was his idea to take the bikes and go see her, but once there, he only talks to her for a few minutes, and then he and you head away. Years later, you will see this girl in a bar near closing time with a guy who is stumbling drunk. He clings to her like property. She tries to talk to you, to recall that day years ago. You ghost look her, then walk away because you are not interested, because she belongs to a different time, a different place, a time that seems disconnected from the current moment. Of course, everything is connected, even those of you who are hearing this here and now. When you are on the motorcycle riding on the rain-wet pavement, you feel good for a moment, relaxed and away from the world. Then you try to take a curve a little too fast going downhill, and the wheels lock up and you skid into the wrong lane. You are headed for a tree, a wide, sturdy oak, and you think that you will hit it and that you will die. You think maybe you did die. Maybe everything that came after that moment is an illusion. Perhaps the world is only poorly reasoned assumptions and a tissue of lies. Even now, you think this makes as much sense as all the things that came before and all the things that followed. And you think that maybe to hit that tree would have been the best possible outcome. But you didn't. You downshifted, rode the curve, and moved on to survive other hills in the years that followed, some by accident and some on purpose. So one of the things that I'm concerned with, or the poems are concerned with in this new collection, is the idea of identity and what follows us in our DNA, in our makeup, like what our ancestors contribute to us, and thinking about that idea. And so you can sort of get the beginnings of that in that previous poem. And this is like I said, one of the last poems, and it starts off the title is Perhaps I Am, and it just kind of one of those poems that just sort of leads into the title, leads into the first line. Perhaps I am a ghost haunted by remnants tumbling through time, the heft of ancestors, antecedents and causations falls on me. When I was young, it came to me that I once stood on the northern island in the Hebrides, and the wind was harsh, and the air was cold, and the water was a vast gray invitation. When I was a child, once they bade me to enter a closed, dark space, a curiosity tour, a leftover munitions storage cellar dug 200 years before. And I knew that this was no good, that long ago some element of me was pressed into a dank shadow for so long it was an eternity. It presses me still. These ethereal remnants, they warn and inform murder ballads that have traveled long and years and transformed, now sing lonesome and quiet, joyful and sure. They let me know they are still here. There are factors I know without knowing why. I know the swamp snake is the devil because he will take a life, and Mary is the mother when you allow it. I know that mountains can be overcome little by little, and rivers waded when the time is right, that there are voices and feelings, remnants that lived once, that can live again.
Wow, that is amazing work, Jerry. We're so glad that you were able to come on. I wasn't as familiar with your work as, quite frankly, I ought to be, considering what you're writing about. I adored the motorcycle prose poem. Yeah, that was such a delicious evocation of having been somebody who in their teens rode, when you said enduro, I was like, yeah, I had one of those. And I love the way this, like, I think the idea of a person acting as a time machine, like, oh, you're from no, you're from then, which can be, either delightful or entirely undesirable. And I love the way you move through the that wonderful wrap up with that. It was such an amazing piece of work.
Oh, thank you very much.
I think it's a great opening poem. It would definitely compel me to keep reading.
So, yeah, like I said, I'm almost there. So I want to finish polishing it before school starts in the fall, and try to get it out and hopefully get published. So
cool.
I really like the line. Of course, everything is connected. The assumption there that we all know this somehow, and yet how easily we all forget it.
Yeah. I mean, that narrator is like saying, no, this person, I just want to ignore her, that she's not connected, but then reflecting and go, well, yes, of course. Everything.
Yeah, and we always forget that. I think that the decisions that we make, the actions that we take, impact other people, and it might not be in this moment, but it could be down the line, and we might need those people at some point. We might need to rely on them because we are all connected somehow, and through energy and through space and time and experiences. So I really like that poem.
Yeah, and towards the last poem, you get a little bit more of a hint of it. But I've been thinking a lot, and as I was writing this book, thinking about what came down through the generations. Like I really, ever since I was a little kid, wanted to go visit the Hebrides, which are the islands off of Scotland, right?
Right on, yeah.
And I don't know why. And only since the advent of cheap DNA testing, found out that there is a line of my ancestry that is from the Hebrides. And like, why was I attracted to this odd place when I was a kid? I have no idea.
So there's calling.
I mean, there's my daughter and I, we talk on the phone often, and she'll tell me something that she doesn't like to do, and I'm like, and it'll be something that I hadn't talked about, but she'll like we're a lot alike in some ways but she's been out of the house for several years and lives in New York, and she'll go, oh, I don't like to do this, and I'm like, I never like to do that either. So like there's things that I know that I pass on to her, but it's not necessarily like from behaviors I've done in front of her. It's just like things that she's inherited from me. And I wonder, how far does that go back? Can it go back?
Well, I've been fascinated by the idea of epigenetics. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's this idea that things that we experience as individuals can be passed on to our children through the generations, and not just the obvious things like trauma, but other things too. And I'm really interested in the connection between that and old wives' tales, right? So there was one in my community: you shouldn't go to a fire when you're pregnant, or your baby will be born with a strawberry birthmark somewhere on their body, right? And there's now these connections that link like pregnant mothers attending traumatic events and it causing birthmarks. Like, so you're onto something there with that idea that nature versus nurture, how much is nature, how much is nurture, is this enduring question, I think.
Yeah,
I mean, it's out there. There's research out there that supports that idea, so that's really cool.
Good. Yeah, it's an interesting, lots of interesting ideas, and as we, I think we live in an interesting time that we can, for not very much money, for less than $100, you can go back and find out a lot of information, generations and generations back. Like I have an aunt who is one of my oldest living relatives, and I've been telling her stuff about like her grandfather, and then like the people, because I've been starting to research folks, and one line of my family I've been able to go back to like the 1600s, and I didn't know that, and she's like, oh, I didn't know that. The best story I found out so far is that my great-grandfather in the 30s, he got arrested for moonshining outside of nearby here in Danville, Pennsylvania, outside by the sheriff. and I had heard that story from my mother, like that he used to take the wagon into town on Saturdays, and it wasn't always milk in the milk jugs. But, but then I was able to find a document that the next year he ran for sheriff, which I thought was the greatest thing. Right? So
better running for than running from.
So I thought, wow, this is great. He gets arrested and he's like, I'll show them. I'll be the sheriff, and then I can't arrest myself, I guess. But yeah, you had to do what you did. It was during the Depression and during Prohibition, and
sure, people had to fend for themselves one way or the other, right?
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of commentary over here from some of our regular viewers. Karen Wyant says, wonderful slice of Pennsylvania poems. Rusty Barnes says, I went to Mansfield University of PA and grew up nearby. These poems resonate. And Marjorie Maddox says, a powerful poem. So got a lot of endorsements over there for your current work and your new work that you're working on now.
Well, thanks everyone.
Okay, cool. Can we see the cover?
Yep. The cover of this one of Artemis Ark.
Yep. And where can folks pick that one up, Jerry?
Well, it's available on that big Amazonian place, and but also directly from the publisher, Finishing Line Press, which would be
cool.
Help support them. This is an old bridge that ran between at the confluence of the Susquehanna River that ran between Northumberland and Shamokin Dam, and a painting that a friend of mine did from this bridge is gone, but it's referenced a couple of times.
Cool.
Very
so
cool.
It only lives on the cover of your book, which is it's interesting.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, we are going to look forward to your new book coming out. I really love the shift to the sort of journey into prose poetry.
Yeah, I just got sick of counting syllables. Do something else. Yeah.
Collecting essays for the collection on rural Pennsylvania.
Yes, there is there's an email. If you go on Facebook and DM me, I can't remember the email because I didn't set it up, and somebody else, the press, set it up, and so I don't remember it offhand, and I don't want to say the wrong one. And
no, right on.
So, but if you find me on Facebook and DM me, I'll give you the correct email to submit those, and I can. And also, I know I've posted a few times on Facebook the guidelines, but I'd be glad to send those out if anybody DMs me on Facebook. I can send those out, and I'll keep posting them and sending them out to lots of folks because the deadline isn't until January 1st. So we have
excellent.
Super cool. All right. Great. Thanks, Jerry, so much for joining us.
Well, thanks. It's been fun, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, lots of good folks at Lit Youngstown Conference.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see you all next week.
Good night, everybody.